There's 1 out of 200 school-age children that exhibit some characteristics of TS. Next. TS is characterized by motor and vocal tics. A motor tic is an involuntary, rapid, sudden movement that occurs repeatedly. Next, some examples of motor tics that might be seen are eye blinking, shoulder shrugging, head jerking, finger tapping, facial grimacing. And as you can see, there are also more complex motor tics. This also could, my understanding is this can be downloaded for your information. In a school setting, we see many, many children, though, with eye blinking. Next. A vocal tic is a sound, noise, word, or group of words that is meaningless or out of context. Some common examples of vocal tics are sniffing, throat clearing, squealing, barking. And again, the sniffing and throat clearing, so often we see that in so many children in a school setting. I just had a student, a 4th grade student that came in yesterday who has TS, and she was talking about her tics, and she identified that she has neck movement as a motor tic and the clearing of her throat. Again, with vocal tics, we see that they can be more complex type of tics. Next, in addition, there are 3 other unusual types of vocal tics that sometimes people with TS may exhibit. One is echolalia, and this is the involuntary repetition of what someone else has just said. Part of all of what has been said may be repeated. Palalia is the involuntary repetition of one's own words. Coprolalia is the most infamous and problematic type of vocal tic. It refers to the involuntary utterance of curse words, ethnic or racial slurs, or socially inappropriate phrases or sentences, often with sexual connotation. Many times it can be quite elaborate, and thus it's misinterpreted as actual intentional utterances. Coprolalia is not necessary for a diagnosis of TS. Unfortunately, the media portrayal of anyone or any character with TS, they usually give this characteristic of the coprolalia. Actually, a very small percentage, they feel only 5% of people with TS will exhibit this specific vocal tic. Next. Tics can be idiosyncratic in nature, and any sound or movement that is involuntary and repeated can be thought of as a tic. It's also quite common for people with TS to imitate the movements of others, including their tics. Therefore, the words and behaviors of others might be copied and thus becomes a tic. And this is called echopraxia. Again, this might be perceived as intentional mimicry. So, for example, if you had a student in the back of the class and they appear to be mimicking a student that has TS, and they appear to be mimicking a teacher's movement or mannerisms, the teacher might get quite upset and more than likely send the student to the principal's office when essentially it is a characteristic of TS. We have special camps for kids with TS, and parents report that they send their children to camps with their specific tics and come home with a different set of tics because they are imitating other students with tics. Next. Both motor and vocal tics tend to wax and wane in response to environmental factors. Tics may change in their frequency, their type, their location over time. We recognize that environmental factors can make tics worse. Stress can, anxiety can, excitement. We usually don't think of a child when they're excited as a stressor in making the tics worse, but yes, they can, as well as fatigue and illness. The symptoms of TS may worsen during puberty and may improve after the adolescent years. However, TS is a chronic, lifelong disorder. This disorder is probably caused by abnormal metabolism of at least one brain chemical. Next. In terms of making the diagnosis, there is no medical test to prove or disprove the presence of TS. Gene or genetic studies have not yet been identified, but there is a criteria that physicians can use to diagnose TS. Next. One needs to have multiple motor and one or more vocal tics present for at least 1 year, although not necessarily simultaneously. The occurrence of tics many times a day, nearly every day, throughout a span of more than 1 year. Periodic changes in the number, frequency, severity, type, and location of the tics. Symptoms can sometimes disappear for weeks or months at a time. The onset before the age of 18 years, but most typically between the ages of 6 and 8 years. So again, this gives you an idea of how the diagnosis is made. Many times neurologists might feel the child has TS, but as a clinical diagnosis, one is supposed to wait that 1 year. As an educator, if you do not have a student in your class at the moment with TS, you will. Next. Not everyone with tics has TS. There are tic disorders, and these can be differentiated on the basis of duration of the tics. We have transient tic disorder, which is characterized by tics lasting for at least 4 weeks, but for no longer than 12 consecutive months. Chronic motor tic disorder is characterized by at least one motor tic and no vocal tics, while chronic vocal tic disorder is characterized by at least one vocal tic and no motor tics. Next. Tourette syndrome is a neurological disorder. However, it does have associated neurological disorders with it. The most common genetic neurological disorders are obsessive-compulsive disorder, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, and learning disabilities. Janine and I will cover these three in more detail briefly. In addition, students may exhibit other neurological symptoms, including executive dysfunction, depression, anxiety disorders, sleep disorders, fine motor difficulties, aggressive and or explosive behaviors, and sensory defensiveness. Next. So many times, these associated characteristics that are often the greatest challenge in the classroom situation. To also give you an idea of an incidence of anxiety and mood disorders with people with TS is approximately 70%. Next. So in a class setting or people with TS, many times it's the tics are not the most disruptive problem in a classroom setting, but it's the associated disorders that are most difficult to sometimes deal with. So it's very important as educators that you are aware of the associated disorders. Most of the times with Tourette's, we just think of the tics, but again, there are associated disorders. Next. So the first associated disorder I want to talk about is obsessive-compulsive disorder. And this is many times not apparent to other students or to teachers, but it is a neurological disorder that affects an extremely large number of persons with TS. Again, they feel approximately 60% of people with TS have OCD. And it's described as tics of the mind. Children with OCD really disclose their troublesome thoughts, hesitating to discuss them for fear that others will think that they are crazy. Next. Obsessions or intrusive thoughts, images, or impulses that are very unpleasant and on which your mind gets stuck. Compulsions are behaviors that are used to reduce the anxiety that accompany the obsessions. Next, the common obsessions and compulsions may include need for symmetry and perfectionism, neatness, evening things up, counting, checking things repeatedly, constant doubt, germ obsession, ritualistic behavior. I think there's a little OCD in many of us, or myself will say, but if you look around with the World Series coming up and baseball players, you can see a lot of ritualistic behavior where your pitchers have to have a whole routine that they have to do before they do the first pitch. Sometimes we all have to go back and check that we truly locked the door or that we turned off the oven. But again, this is not interfering with our life. Next. So OCD, again, is a neurological disorder that is characterized by being stuck and driven and that of a perfectionist. Next. At this point, when we do a workshop, we like for the educators to actually get a feel for what it might be like for a student with TS having a motor and vocal tic and having some OCD. And we tell them, to prepare for this exercise, we tell them that we're going to do a very simple writing assignment that they're very familiar with and that they'll have 90 seconds to perform. I first have the participants practice a vocal tic, and then I tell them their motor tic will be touching the top of their paper with their index finger. For the OCD, I tell them this paper that they hand in must be perfect. So every third word that they write, they need to erase and rewrite it because it just wasn't perfect. And essentially the exercise is they have to write the words to the Pledge of Allegiance. And during the 90 seconds, I will clap my hands several times, and every time I clap my hands, they need to tick and show their OCD. And then at the end of this exercise, we discuss how difficult something that was such a simple task is when you have TS. Tonight we don't have time to do this exercise, but if you actually use the archive version of our presentation, we will put a pause at this point so you can do it with other participants. So at this point, I just want to remind you that these OCD can be very difficult and challenging for educators in a classroom setting. I'm going to hand this over to Janine, who will continue.
Welcome, everybody. Go ahead and go to the next slide, please. We're going to begin talking this evening about attention deficit hyperactivity disorder because a significant number of people with Tourette syndrome also have attention deficit disorder. In fact, 70% of students with TS also exhibit attention deficit disorder. Now, this is characterized by children who are very disorganized, very disruptive, impulsive, inattentive, and this may be the most problematic aspect of TS because it's often interpreted exclusively as a behavior problem. Students with ADHD or ADD often demand a great deal of extra time from the teacher. The students lose their homework, they come to class without pencils, they bring the wrong materials, they might blurt out answers without being called on. They pay little attention to the teacher or to the discussion in progress. Sometimes teachers consider these students the high-maintenance kids. Next. We said that they're very impulsive, and oftentimes, by the time they think about something, they've already done it. Next. As we said, common difficulties for children with ADHD are paying attention, getting started on a task, sequencing information, organizing material, and regulating the intensity of their emotional responses. Now, in the second module, next week, we'll go into specific ways that you can present interventions within the classroom and specific techniques that will help students with these challenges. Our purpose tonight is just to expose you to the challenges of students with TS. As we said, these students lose their homework, they come to class without material, Given all the problems described so far, it's easy to see how children with TS and ADHD can have a very difficult time adjusting to the demands of school, and they're in need of a great deal of reassurance and environmental structure. Next. Now, often we think of children with ADD as needing medication, and while medication may help a student to focus and to be able to produce work and to be able to attend tasks, it doesn't necessarily help with the organizational skills. That's still something that we have to teach directly. Next. Let's talk specifically about executive function for just a minute. Executive function is the ability to form goals, to plan and organize appropriately, and perform effectively. And as we said, a large number of people with TS and ADHD lack the ability to do these things. Next. Attention deficit hyperactivity disorder is a neurological disorder, and as we said, about 70% of people with TS have this issue. They also will be very hyperactive. They have the impulse control problems. They're distractible. They exhibit a short-term memory difficulty, and what a teacher might interpret as just not paying attention when you say, open your book to page 43 and look at the chart, may be that they can't hold on to, open the book, open to page 43, and then look at the chart. They may only be able to hold on to, in their mind, open the book, or maybe only 43 and not look at the chart. So what could be a short-term memory difficulty sometimes is interpreted as not paying attention. We also find that ADD children are very socially immature. Next. Russell Barkley is an excellent source for additional information on ADD or ADHD. Next. Some students with TS and ADHD exhibit a short fuse and a low frustration tolerance that can lead to an all-out loss of control. They go into rage attacks, is sometimes the way they're described. This extreme reaction, like an average person might have this reaction to a car accident or a death in the family. A child with TS and ADHD could have this same reaction over a minor disturbance, such as dropping an ice cream cone or losing a toy or a book. If you've ever had a car accident, you go into a shock-like state. You might yell or even hit a police officer, something you'd never do under normal circumstances. Well, children with TS and ADHD go unpredictably in and out of this shock-like state all day long, and they do things and say things that they may not even remember doing or saying. Next. We say that children with ADHD have a deregulated arousal system, and that's what causes them to have a difficult time controlling their behavior, being socially competent, and performing well in school. As a result, we need to teach these skills directly, and next week's seminar, again, will give more specific suggestions on how to help students become more socially competent and perform better in school. Next. Again, we say that these are the children that leap before they look. Go ahead. Now, in addition to having the tic issues, having the OCD issues, and the ADD issues, at least 25% of students with TS also have some kind of learning disability. This contributes to poor school performance and low self-esteem. A majority of these students, close to 70%, have handwriting difficulties. Next. Fine motor and visual motor impairments are nonverbal learning disabilities. We see this with slow, laborious handwriting, hand and finger cramping, sloppy handwriting, uneven spaces, irregular margins, inconsistent lettering. They have an inability to copy correctly from the book to the paper or from the chalkboard or overhead onto their own paper. This can be resolved with the use of computers or word processors, and we'll have several other suggestions next week. Next. As we said, a significant number of people with TS also have a difficult time with handwriting. It's often caused by a visual motor integration problem. Students with this difficulty write slowly, laboriously. As we said, they often have cramps in their hands and fingers. And produce a product that's sloppy, uneven space, has poor margin recognition, inconsistent lettering. They may have capital letters in the middle of a word or lowercase letters at the beginning of a proper noun. Even experienced teachers will likely interpret this as indicating that they're a careless student, or even worse, one with a negative attitude. And that's not necessarily the case. For many students, the difficulty can be bypassed, as we said, by using a word processor or a computer. Next. Now, when we do on-site workshops, we do another experiential exercise in addition to the one that Ann described. This one helps people understand what it's like to have a learning disability. We may have a sock or a mitten or a bag that the participants will put their writing hand into, or we might hand them marbles and ask them to hold the marbles in their writing hand as well as the pen that they're going to write with. I often ask participants then to record maybe 3 things that they've learned so far that they didn't learn before they began the workshop, and then we use it as a way to overview or review what we've learned so far, and then we also talk about what it's like to have the challenge of trying to hold marbles or have your hand covered and try to write. Participants often share with us that they find it so distracting that they have a hard time recording the information. Next. Let's talk for a minute about sensory defensiveness. A large majority of children with TS experience this. This phenomenon can affect any of the senses. For example, attentional problems may be primarily due to a lack of auditory discrimination. For example, a 15-year-old boy related that he once lost 10 minutes of a social studies test because the girl next to him took out a stick of gum. The simple sound of the rattling gum wrapper was interfering to him as a loud airplane flying overhead. Tactile defensiveness, one type of sensory defensiveness, is frequently a cause for great anxiety in these children. Parents report that their children can only wear certain fabrics or clothes that fit a certain way. They need to have tags cut out of their clothing, and they can't tolerate being touched suddenly. They might be the people that don't like the steam in their socks rubbing against their toes a certain way. Many people with TS experience sensory tics. They have to feel a certain sensation, usually pain, in order to relieve a feeling of anxiety. Thus, you may encounter children with seemingly self-abusive behavior, such as picking scabs, touching hot objects until they burn themselves, and hitting themselves. These children are also often bothered by lights that are too bright or odors that are more intense to them than they would be to others. These heightened sensory experiences can often create anxiety and sometimes rage in children, preventing them from functioning socially and academically. To put it in terms that the rest of us can relate to, imagine if you had a very bad sunburn and were asked to wear a scratchy wool sweater. Please keep in mind that exposure to one child with TS doesn't necessarily explain the entire syndrome. Each child that you meet will teach you more about this complex syndrome. Children with TS are each a work in progress, and when given the opportunity, these children are able to achieve, accomplish, and contribute. When limited and treated inappropriately, they'll do poorly. Let's just review and summarize, and in doing so, we'll use this true and false quiz. Question number 1, people with TS are emotionally disturbed and dangerous. True or false? False. People with TS are mentally retarded. False. TS is contagious. False. When we do on-site peer in-services, we talk about this specifically because often students want to know, can I catch this from a student? Children with TS are not responsible for any of their actions. False. They are responsible for some of their actions, and we'll discuss that in more depth in next week's webinar. Children with TS manifest the same symptoms and the same severity of symptoms all the time. False. As Ann explained to you earlier, they wax and wane. They come and go, depending on what's going on in their life. If they're coming down with something, or if they've been in an argument with someone, those are the things that might exacerbate their symptoms. Tics can be clearly differentiated from other behaviors? No, they can't be. Next. Disorganization and impulsivity is willful. False. We often see that this is one of those symptoms of ADD, ADHD. People with TS always swear. False. Actually, as Ann pointed out, only about 5 to 10% of people with TS actually have that particular symptom. Medication will cure TS? False. It may treat some of the symptoms, but because there are also side effects, we have to consider, as parents, we have to consider whether that's something we're willing to expose our children to. People with TS can control the symptoms if they want to. We said that that's false. They can't control it necessarily. What I do when I do on-site in-service is I explain to the participants that it's sort of like you trying to stop yourself from yawning or stop yourself from sneezing or stop yourself from blinking. If you suppress your urge to yawn or suppress your urge to blink, you'll get some sense of the little bit of anxiety that builds while you're trying to suppress that. Next. This concludes the first part of Module 1. And we just want to make sure that you understand that it's a very complex disorder. As an educator and as a parent, I want to sincerely thank the participants for listening in and learning about the subject that's so near to my heart. And I also want to let you know that we need you to stay with us to complete the evaluation of the webinar. Your feedback will help us greatly. I'd also like to encourage everyone to tune in next week for Part 2, which will give specific details about interventions and practical strategies for the educational setting. Module 2 is scheduled for October 1 at 7:30. Participants, I'd like to reach out to you and ask that you encourage others to view the webinar, which we've just completed. It'll be archived on our website. One administrator shared with us that he's going to have a staff in-service and stream the webinar to offer his employees professional development as well as district continuing education units. Now, if you participated in this entire webinar, professional development hours and continuing education units are available. Again, we need you to complete the evaluation at the end of the webinar. New Jersey parents can log on to our website or contact the New Jersey Center for Tourette Syndrome to find an on-site workshop at one of the local colleges or to arrange an on-site workshop for the children's school district. That concludes this second portion, and we'll move into the portion of question and answer now.
Thank you, ladies. This is Marty again. We're going to begin the question period with questions that were posted to the webinar chat board during the presentation. We'll answer as many questions as we have time for. However, if we don't get to your question tonight, or if you think of something that you'd like to ask, the presenters will continue to answer questions posted on our website for the next 7 days. So the first question we have is, do you have any suggestions for a student who has ADHD that cannot sit still and is disruptive to the entire class? And I'm going to throw this out to both you ladies. You decide how you'd like to answer this.
Well, being an educator myself, I often experience students that have a difficult time sitting still in a classroom. I find that giving them frequent breaks and sitting them possibly in the back of the class so that their movements don't necessarily disrupt other people, and yet it gives them the freedom to move around. Because truly, they can't help it. That's just the way they're wired, and we have to give them a little bit of freedom of movement. Sometimes giving them breaks, allowing them to run errands or go to the bathroom or get a drink, can give them the break that they need to be able to settle.
Okay, thanks, Janine. Another question. Can a child have TS and not have the associated disorders?
I can try answering that one. Yes, you can have children that have TS, having the motor and vocal tics, and not necessarily have the associated disorder. However, as we said, the incidence is fairly high in having the associated disorder. So it is fairly common to have the TS plus some of the associated disorder, but yes, you can have TS with motor and vocal tics only.
Thanks. And if a child is sniffing or clearing their throat, how can you tell if it's a tic?
That's a really difficult one. My son actually started with the clearing the throat tic, and the neurologist said that that was a vocal tic, and of course I thought, oh, maybe it's just allergies. So it's really difficult to know what is allergies what is that heightened sensitivity to mucus in the back of the throat, and what is truly just a tick. It's real tough to know that. I would suggest possibly having an evaluation for allergies and see if that helps. Anne, what would
I was going to say, we see parents that usually start out going to the allergist, or if they're having eye blinking, they might go to an ophthalmologist. And again, for the diagnosis, if the clearing of the throat is continuous for that 1-year period, as well as having some motor tick, then usually you get the diagnosis of the TS. But again, it's that 1-year criteria.
Okay. Our son is 10, and we have never told him he has TS. Have we waited too long to tell him why he does what he does?
I don't think you've waited too long. I think any time is a good time. I did the same thing with my son. I didn't tell him for the longest time. I just pretended like I didn't notice. But as he got older, I felt that it was important to let him in on it because I didn't want him to feel like there was something wrong with him. I wanted him to feel more like, well, this is just the way I'm wired. It's just the way I'm created, and that's just the way it is. So I thought it was real important to share that with him.
And many times we have to wait until the child is developmentally ready. So whenever you choose to tell is the right time.
Okay. Can vomiting be a tick?
Oh. I've never heard that. As a school nurse, I mean, unless the child is clearing their throat with such vigor, causing themselves to vomit, but usually vomiting per se is a symptom of an illness. I know anything can be considered a tick, but I don't, again, unless it's just almost violently tight clearing one's throat.
And again, if we have that sensory defensiveness, if there's that mucus in the back of the throat that makes them feel like they're gagging, that could possibly be related, maybe perhaps more to sensory defensiveness than an actual tick. But I did do an on-site in-service once where a parent mentioned that their child would go through phases where she would vomit.
Okay. This is a little bit more lengthy. I was recently asked, what would happen if you just let your child get zeros for homework if they forget to take assignments home? The counselor knows we have requested a maintained assignment folder, but we are still not getting assignments. Should we let him stay in from recess to complete assignments we never received?
I'm not 100% sure I'm following that, but I always believe in discussing with the teacher. Janine, you might be better able to answer that.
I would definitely agree with that the best way would be to discuss with the teacher what's going on and why the assignments aren't being given. If the child is characterized or is classified as a special education student, and you may or may not have to have a child with TS classified, but if the child is classified, a possible option would be to have an in-class support teacher, which would be another trained professional, to actually follow up on making sure the information is in the assignment pad. I know as an in-class support teacher, I do that for my students.
And the other thing is having a child with has TS and possibly ADHD staying in at recess, they really have a lot of energy, and they need to run around outside. So that's a fairly severe punishment, having a child stay in at recess. If there's other options that could be found, would be more beneficial to the child, I would think.
Okay, thank you. What is the best way to handle obsessive-compulsive type of behaviors? For example, a student who must walk on certain designs on the hallway floor while the class is walking together.
Personally, I feel that should just be ignored. It's an OCD characteristic. The child can't help it. And if they're walking down the hall, I don't see that as something that's interfering with anybody's learning process. I don't see it as interfering with the child's ability to get from point A to point B, so I just feel that should be ignored. Just accept it as that's the way that child is, and I just feel like there's other things that are more important than how a child's walking down the hall. So I guess the rule of thumb there is if it can be ignored, ignore it. If it's something that's not interfering with the child's learning, let it go.
And it does depend on what the specific OCD symptom might be. And again, whether it interferes with the learning process.
Okay. When should a child with Tourette have an IEP or a 504 in place, and what are some of the benefits of having one of those plans?
I would say it probably depends on to what extent the child's TS and associated disabilities are involved. So if the child exhibits learning disability and is really struggling academically with handwriting, and then there might be a need for an IEP. So I think each child is individual, and a parent can certainly talk to their teacher to assess where their child might be. Not all children with TS need 504s or IEPs. Majority might because of the associated disorders with them.
Okay, thanks. How would you suggest telling the other students about the behaviors of the TS student?
That's a great question. When we come to on-site workshops, sometimes we do peer in-services. Now, of course, you have to be sensitive to students' right to privacy. So you might begin by saying, are you familiar with diabetes? And just talk about what diabetes are. And then talk about allergies and talk about braces and glasses. And just say that we're all different and very individual. And sometimes people have things that make it real tough for them to sit still or make it real tough for them to pay attention. And then you can just kind of talk about it in broad terms. But it wouldn't be okay to say Joe has TS unless you have the permission of the parents and the child. And then I would include the child in on the discussion with the peers and let the child kind of describe to the peers what's going on. Anne, what do you think?
I agree with you. Because of the issue of confidentiality, I never make names, and I do ask the student permission and the parent permission even prior to. If the student wants to join in, I think that's fantastic to advocate for themselves. But I've noticed when I talk to a class, many times the children have no idea that there might even be a child in the classroom that has TS. But we also try to emphasize that all children are different. We all are very different. And just as Janine said, some people wear glasses or hearing aids. This might be a child that can't control some of, or might have some movement or some vocal type ticking.
Okay, thank you. Will the tics ever completely disappear?
There's and I don't have the percentage in front of me, but as a child gets older, it usually becomes less prominent. And there's a certain percentage that some adults will not exhibit any, but most adults have, let's say, show some tics, but they're able to compensate fairly well too, and would not be noticed by others.
Okay. Is the handwriting difficulty usually found in long assignments or short?
I would say both. Anytime there's a writing assignment, it can be something as simple as math. The handwriting difficulty is still going to be there. Of course, the longer the assignment, the more difficult the challenge of writing is going to be.
Okay. Do some children with TS shut down when put in a situation they are uncomfortable with?
I think that would be true of most children if they're overwhelmed in a situation. I'm not sure how specific it is to children with TS. I mean, they might get frustrated maybe a little more easily.
I would agree with that. And we often see that with ADD kids. When they're overwhelmed with frustration, they just shut down. But a nurturing educator can help bring that person back to work. In fact, I had a student just today that did that shutdown thing, and he said, I just don't want to do it. And so I quietly walk over to his desk. Instead of standing up in front of the classroom and making a big issue, I just simply said, is it that you don't understand it? No, I just don't want to do it. Well, if you're stuck on it, let me help you. And just by being kind and understanding, sometimes you can bring the student to begin the work. And once they begin, they get the assignment done.
And I think, Janine, when you brought up also that executive functioning, that small tasks are easier to accomplish than the whole large project. So if it can be broken down into smaller parts, it just seems easier to accomplish.
That's a great observation. Oftentimes what I'll do in the classroom is I might say, I just want you to do these first 5 problems. Let me know when you're done, and I'll look over to make sure you're on the right track. Now, it might not be that I really want to know if they're on the right track. I may pretty well feel that they can do all 10 or 15 problems, but I might just say that because I know that if I just get them started, they'll be able to complete the assignment.
Okay, thank you. There's a question, and it may have been tackled a little bit in some form earlier. I want to offer it because I think it's a pretty good question, but you may have touched on it earlier. Do you recommend that children with TS tell their peers?
I do.
Okay. And I think it's a personal decision. But Janine, why don't you continue your thoughts?
Well, I think it's important that they share that with peers so that the peers can understand them. And one way of beginning that conversation, again, is say, some people have allergies and they take allergy medication and they have this symptom or that symptom, and, compare it to other things that children are already familiar with, and then introduce this. And then I think once children share it openly, that other children will become more accepting.
Okay. This is, I think, a good question, but it's a little long, so just bear with me, okay? My child has vocal tics and ADHD, and I believe shows symptoms of OCD. He has rage attacks that occur simultaneously with the periods of time when his tics are at their worst. The neurologist has told me that unless he has a motor tic, then he does not have Tourette. But, however, the anger episodes have seemed to be described perfectly by the triple diagnosis. So I'm guessing here that there's no motor tic, but there's rage and other vocal tics.
Yeah, and this absolutely can be part of this whole picture. And I'll be honest with you, I never felt like I had to have the official diagnosis of TS. My oldest son was diagnosed with TS in 2nd grade. My youngest son showed tic symptoms, but I never pursued having him diagnosed as TS because I just felt like it doesn't change the way I'm going to parent him. It doesn't change the way I'm going to help him with homework. And it doesn't really change how teachers are going to help him out. In the case of the severe rage attacks, that's also something that we see with ADD or ADHD children. That's a characteristic, that short fuse is what we see there. So it could be part of the TS kind of package. It could be part of the ADD package. But it's certainly a symptom, and we don't necessarily need a label. We just need to help that child work through.
And it's right, and it's possible the motor tic is so subtle as well that it's
not visible.
Yeah, it's almost or the child's compensating with the motor tic, and
okay. This attendee has a follow-up question, and once regarding the same question, would it change the way that he is medicated? And I don't know if that's a question.
Well,
you're up for.
Well, as Janine said, with medication, there's no cure for TS. So the medication is only helping the symptoms.
Correct. Yeah,
so
I
it
agree.
Depends on what medication. I would say the medication would be used for a specific symptom, so it wouldn't matter if they had a specific diagnosis necessarily of TS in terms of medication. Again, that would be something to discuss with your neurologist. But for example, like ADHD has specific medication, but you're just targeting that symptom, which is the ADHD. And whether a child has TS or doesn't, if you choose to medicate the ADHD, it would not matter of the diagnosis of TS.
Okay. My son was, I'm sorry, wrong question. Please elaborate on pandas connection. Is there any association with severe anxiety? My son had his tonsils removed 6 years ago. He's now 15 and suffers from anxiety and depression. He's medicated, followed by a psychiatrist, counselor, neurologist. Nothing is helping.
Did you say panda?
Yes.
Okay. My understanding, and I've listened to a neurologist talk about this, that a strep infection, per se, for some children becomes a trigger for Tourette's, but it's not that strep causes Tourette's. Tourette's has been there, but that might be just a trigger that brought it on. But the Tourette's would have come at another point and not necessarily, let's say, following a strep infection.
And as Ann said, 60 to 70% of people with TS also have that anxiety component. So we often see that.
Okay. Can stuttering be associated with TS?
Yes, when I originally started doing the workshops, that was actually in the literature. That's what we call those speech atypicalities, like a stuttering kind of thing, or the intensity of speech, the way they speak. We can see that.
Okay. My son is 9.5 and has just been diagnosed with TS and has become has some very angry outbursts over simple things and then regrets the things he says. When we talk, he says he's sad and mad all the time and doesn't like it. And this parent's looking for some suggestions about what this means.
I'd like to encourage the parents to talk with a physician about that because there certainly are chemical adjustments that could be made through medication to help with that severe sad and mad kind of feeling all the time, to help the child be able to control better. And then I also think counseling is very helpful.
Okay. What is the best way to engage a student in a complex learning environment, such as music, where fine motor skills are involved in playing instruments?
Often we find that children with TS, or adults even with TS, once they're engrossed in those kind of activities, they actually don't even exhibit some of the TS symptoms. Ann, how about you?
I agree. A lot of times the parents will say with sports, and their child is a goalie and has to actually stay put for long periods of time, and they're so focused that there's absolutely no ticking involved. So I would try and have your child do whatever instrument they may want to attempt.
And I believe the
where you go with that.
I think the question started out with how do you engage a person in that, and I think just encouraging them to select something that they enjoy. But I don't think that pushing it beyond what they're comfortable with. In other words, don't try to get them to play piano if they really don't want to play or enjoy piano, because that's just going to create more stress, which will then exacerbate the TS symptoms.
Okay. How should we help as an educator to improve a child's handwriting?
Patiently encouraging students to do their best, but also as educators we have to understand that part of that is just not something that they can necessarily control. I wouldn't say to a child with cerebral palsy, oh, come on, you've got to write neater. I would just encourage them to do the best they can, and then I would understand. I would also encourage them to use either a word processor or a tool like AlphaSmart. It's like a word processor where they could sit at their desk and actually type the information.
And as you say, Janine, with today's technology, why frustrate the child more? The handwriting is just so very difficult for children with TS.
Question about sensory defensiveness. Why is it linked to Tourette, and what percentage of Tourette children have that? Would you guess?
I don't know.
We don't know why it's linked to it. I'm looking to see if I can find statistics.
And this may be a question we might be able to reply in a little bit more in depth when we're offline as well.
Okay. Also, some of the associated disorders, some of them don't have things in common, yet it is made up of what TS is about. So just like OCD, why is OCD and ADHD linked to TS? And I'm not sure we necessarily know that, other than there might be some, as Janine said, some chemical imbalance that is causing this.
Okay. Ian, could you comment upon Risperdal as far as that being a medication for complex tics?
Yes. I know of some children that had it. I know personally my daughter never used it. But there are several good medications out there. This is a fairly common medication. But all medication, again, has side effects, and sometimes it takes a while to find the right combination of medications that will work best for the child. But I know parents have commented that they have had a lot of success with it.
Marty, if I could interrupt here,
there
is a question on the chat that I'm seeing that we haven't addressed yet, and I want to make sure that we take care of that. Should I talk to the teacher or the nurse or the principal about my child not being able to sit still? I would definitely encourage parents to take literature about ADD and TS to the teachers and encourage educators to log on to the website and get more information or attend an in-service, or maybe even go back to the archived webinar here and get more information.
And include the school nurse in that process, too, because many times we are involved in educating the teachers about the condition as well as specials about it as well, and in conjunction with the teacher. And working as a team, a team in the school.
All right. I have another question about our son gets stuck on one topic and only wants to talk to people about what he is obsessing about. Is there a way to get him unstuck?
That's a tough one. I've seen that in the classroom also. I try to distract or redirect, and when they absolutely won't stop or they keep coming back to that, then I'll just gently say, we need to move on, or just, it's one of those social skills that sometimes we have to teach directly, where we just have to tell them outright, we have to move on to another subject.
Okay. I have a parent who's nervous about having their 6-year-old son join a team sport, like soccer, for example, due to some of his head tics. Parent worries about criticisms from teammates or feeling unsuccessful if he misses because he's ticking. Should we let him participate, or am I correct to be concerned, or just let it be?
I would encourage the child to participate, but maybe speak to the coach, and educate the coach as well. And because we don't, again, sometimes when children are very involved in an activity, they really are focusing and concentrating, and then to see how it goes.
Ladies, I want to thank you very much. We are at our hour limit, and we need to close out this webinar. Thank you very much, Ann and Janine. You've done an excellent presentation. We want to thank everybody who's on the call. Thank you for joining our webinar, and just a reminder about the exit survey. When you close out and it prompts you that you're leaving the webinar, the exit survey will pop up. The chat board will be open for tomorrow and be available for the next 7 days, and on the NJCTS website, and any additional questions that weren't covered tonight, you can post there. That website is www.njcts.org. Also, an archived recording of tonight's webinar will be posted to the website within the next 7 days. Again, Ann and Janine, thank you very much, and thank you for all who attended. Good night.
Good night.
Good night.